with me is foreign editor at The Australian, Greg Sheridan. Greg, let's start with what many would be surprised about, this surge in protests and the nature of the protests we're seeing across China right now.
Yes, Kieran. So the protests seem to be kind of being snuffed out now by Chinese security forces, and but it is a remarkable development that the people feel so frustrated about these COVID restrictions that they're willing to risk imprisonment and re-education and all the terrible things that happen to you if you get arrested in China to protest China's crazy lockdown policies. But it also shows, I think, an underlying realisation on the people that they are living in one of the most authoritarian regimes in the world. Very moving, those protests with people holding up blank sheets of paper to show that they're not allowed to say anything. This would be very deeply disturbing for the Chinese government. It doesn't yet threaten Xi Jinping's rule, but it's a very unwelcome development from their point of view. And
really no clear path, in the sense that there's a big percentage of a massive older population unvaccinated. The vaccines aren't as effective as the Western vaccines, and the COVID zero approach hasn't really shifted a great deal. So this looks like it is a recipe for ongoing unrest, despite the immediate sort of calm that might emerge. It seems like it's going to be a harder one over months and if not years, Greg.
Yeah, I think that's right. So the Chinese rejected the mRNA vaccinations, which are much more effective than their own domestically produced vaccinations. There's tremendous distrust by the Chinese population of its own government. So vaccination rates in any event are quite low in China compared with most countries internationally. Now, countries like Australia have been able to open up with a kind of a bearable death rate because everybody is vaccinated. So most people who get the disease don't get it severely. Whereas if China opens up now with so much of its population unvaccinated, it will have massive death rates and it will probably overwhelm its health system. So it's kind of checkmated itself, really, and it just shows how dysfunctional. You know, we tend to think of the Chinese as 12 feet high in terms of their government capacity, but it just shows how dysfunctional and incompetent this Chinese government can be.
Now, Greg, you've written a long piece for the Centre for Independent Studies, not on foreign policy, but on the voice, the proposed Indigenous voice to Parliament and enshrining it in the Constitution. You're critical of the approach, and I guess endorse the Nationals coming out. But is it premature for the Nationals to come out before all of the detail has been fleshed out?
So, Kieran, no, I don't think it is premature at all. So my piece is about how the idea of a constitutionally enshrined elected body whose franchise is limited to one race completely rejects and contradicts the idea of liberalism, universal citizenship and parliamentary democracy. It's premised on the proposition that parliamentary democracy doesn't work for a particular minority. That's a deadly assault on parliamentary democracy. It's also premised on the idea that there should be different categories of citizens, which is a tremendous assault on universal citizenship. I praise the Nationals for their courage in doing this. I don't think the way that this debate has been conducted is quite shocking. Anybody who dares to oppose the voice in principle is subject to the most vituperative abuse. Noel Pearson's attack on Jacinta Price was utterly disgraceful. Imagine if any coalition politician demeaned and vilified an Aboriginal woman in the way that Noel Pearson did. And this is what's happening. This whole voice idea is a wrong turn down the road of identity politics in Australia. The reason the Nationals aren't premature is because it's wrong in principle. So when the matter was first brought up in the Uluru Statement, Malcolm Turnbull and his cabinet rejected it in principle. They didn't need to know a detailed proposal. And Turnbull is very powerful in his memoirs. He subsequently changed his mind, but his treatment in his own memoirs, A Bigger Picture, is very strong on why a constitutionally enshrined voice is a very bad idea and against basic democratic principles. The Scott Morrison cabinet rejected it, Tony Abbott rejects it, John Howard rejects it, and you have to accept it or reject it on principle. If it's just a matter of detail, then that means you accept the principle of a race-based voice in the Constitution, and all you've got to do is sort out the methodology. What I liked about the Nationals' rejection was that they said, this will divide Australians by race. That's true. They're very brave to say it. They're going to get a kicking from every commentator in the country, except me, perhaps. But I think that's true to their values, and the Liberals need to make a similar decision.
Greg Sheridan, I appreciate your time and thoughts as always. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Kieran.